Hello, everyone. This is Margot Buckles with WASBA, and this is Ask a Washington Beekeeper. This is a program that WASBA put together to bring information to beekeepers that might not have access to a club or mentors. And you have the opportunity to not only learn something tonight, but you can ask any question that you like regarding beekeeping. So if you want to ask a question about beekeeping, you can put it in the comments section and we will address it toward the end of the program. So I want to introduce Sandy Fanara. Sandy is a master beekeeper here in Washington. She is a member of the West Sound Beekeepers Club. She works in the beekeeping program in the prisons. She's a WASPA member as well, and she is also an artist who does very cute bee-related art from time to time. So, without any further ado, I'm going to have Sandy talk to you about judging extracted honey. Take it away, Sandy.
All right, thank you. Well, yeah, I've been judging in the honey fairs and the local fairs since 2010. When I was first asked to judge, it was because I have an art degree and they needed somebody to judge the art made out of stuff like beeswax or other apiary products, and then also the cosmetics. And so I got on board with judging through that back door. But the big part about judging anything out of the apiary is the honey judging, and there's a lot of it to do. I started over there in Spokane at the Interstate Fair there, and we would routinely have, I don't know, 20 to 40 entries of honey. And so I got to taste them the first couple of years and chime in with a little bit of what I thought about this and that as the other judges did the actual judging. But then within, I guess, about the third year, I was one of the judges. And so been doing it ever since then and been judging at several fairs in Washington State, and then several of the clubs actually like to do their own as well. The first thing I want to talk about is the difference between judging honey and what the USDA does, which is grading. You'll see on the chart that there's some similarities, and we'll see that as we go through this a little bit. There's some similarities between judging and grading in that they're looking for cleanliness and clarity of the honey, and they're looking for that a filter was used so that there's no, say, like bee parts. And also there are categories such as the color of the honey. All of that goes into both judging and in grading. But the difference comes down to what the USDA gives compared to what a judge at a fair gives. A judge at a fair gives ribbons, and accolades, whereas USDA grading, you end up at the end, if you've done pretty well, you get something called either like a grade A or a grade B or grade C grading, which is what you get to stamp your honey with and sell your honey under. Of course, grade A being the very best. Here's the colors that both the judging and the USDA uses. USDA will use all of these colors, as compared to most judging situations, especially here in Washington State and the fairs. We break it down pretty much into three, which would be light, amber, and dark. Here's the grading system, like I was talking about. It's also based on points, just as judging is, but by the end of it, see at the very top, you have grade A, grade B, grade C, or substandard, which means it doesn't pass at all. Um, the points are very different, but the idea is very much the same. Notice on the left where it's under factors going down, percent of soluble solids. So we in judging would be looking at the percentage of water rather than the percent of salt. It's just sort of the opposite. But then all the rest of those absence of defects and flavor and aroma and clarity, and there are quite a few more that go under a continuation of this chart, is very similar in judging. I just wanted to quickly show you about the grading. I didn't want to spend a lot of time there, but those are, you can see there's some minor differences between the two. The differences come later, though, in judging, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Why do we judge honey? One part is the competition. Some people just love competition. Can be a little bit of fun, like it says, but also, and this is what's important to the USDA, of course, and why they grade honey, and that is also safety. Adulterated honey can go bad or ferment. That's not a good thing. That's one way that honey can become unsafe. There's other ways, but that's probably the biggest. How do we judge? We judge on it based on entry criteria, and every show, whether it's a fair or strictly a honey show, like at a honey conference or a beekeeping conference, for instance, will put out what's called a show premium. And that has the list of what that particular show is going to be judging the entries on, their criteria or the standards that they're going to use. Each event then under those criteria has those variable standards. Some are taken, like I talked about before, from the USDA and the grading system. Others are more localized, including, for instance, the bottle type. The bottle type, let's just look at that. For instance, some fairs or honey shows might accept mason jars as the type of jar that you can show your honey in, while others will only accept queen line. Those are, for instance. At each event, there's variable grades. Again, for instance, most Washington State fairs just look at 3 colors of honey. Each event, variable judging systems. This gets a little confusing to people because most fairs, again, use both of the systems I'm going to describe here. The American system of judging, each entry is compared to other entries. That means per category, there's only 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 white for first, second, and third place handed out. So per category or per class, that's what we call it in for entries. And then special rosettes and awards are given after the fact. Now in the Danish system, each entry receives a ribbon. So if you've been to, let's say, the Puyallup Fair or the Spokane Fair recently, you'll notice that every single entry at the fair is given a ribbon. Even ribbons just for showing up, what we call, they're usually a rainbow color, and they're just a thank you for entering kind of a ribbon. But everybody is acknowledged at that point. The Danish system, therefore, is judging against a standard rather than each entry against the other entry. Most of the fairs, including the Spokane Fair and the Puyallup Fair, use a combination of these two systems where they are, everybody receives a ribbon at most of the time. But then when it comes to the end of the judging, and let's say we have several 100% points awarded to several entries, more than one entry, that would be 100% against the standard. So they've received as many points as they can against the standard. If you have several of those, then we turn to the American system and we judge those 100% winners against the other 100% winners. And that's the way we end up with those special rosettes at that point, such as best in show or best in class, etc. So that's the two systems of judging. Today we're going to look just at judging liquid honey extracted and then placed in a jar. And this is not the point spread that happens at every fair. This is just an example, and it's pretty average, I would say. What we're going to be looking at is the class. The first thing, most fairs, we're very, very interested in helping people, especially people who are entering there for the first time. You know, we're not going to pass or fail them because they put it in the wrong class. They put their light honey in an amber, for instance. We're not going to just throw them out. Absolutely not. We'll just place their entry in the correct class. So most fairs are like that. Now, when you get to the national level or you get into the very specific honey competitions, they do get a little bit more particular. But most of the fairs in Washington State, absolutely not a problem. Then we're going to start with the scoring. Each judge receives a score sheet for every entry, and the points that they earn on each of these categories that are judging criteria that we'll be going through is written down. And then at the very bottom, it's just a little bit of math, and you figure out against the 100 points what that honey has made. Most judges tend to write little notes. I always write notes. I like to do what's called PCP, praise, correct, praise, which means I like to say something good or mention something wonderful about the honey. Then if there's something to correct or critique about the honey, I put that there in the center. And then the last comment, I always like to praise again. And at the very least, ask them to please try another entry next year. Here you can see the list of criteria. These are pretty typical of most fairs. So the first one is the container, and we'll talk about each one of these separately in the following slides, but I'll just quickly mention them. The first one is the container and cleanliness and neatness of it. The next one is the appropriate fill of the container. The degree of density, that's where we're going to find out how much water is in that honey and what's appropriate. The next one is absence of foam and bubbles, then the absence of crystals and cloudiness, then the cleanliness of the honey, that means no bee parts and or nasty things in there, and then finally flavor and aroma. Well, all of the criteria, except for the very last one, flavor and aroma, all of those are what we call very objective. These we can, against a standard, we can judge and give points or deduct points for very particular points within each one of those criteria. The very last one is a lot more subjective, but there are objective judging requirements for the flavor and aroma of honey, and we'll talk about those when we get there. The subjective scoring. So this is the first several, or almost all of them, right? All righty. All right. The very first thing that we are going to look at is the jar, the actual jar that the honey is presented in. first of all, is it the correct type of jar? This picture shows pretty clearly a couple of different kinds of jars. And even on that center jar, you'll notice with that light honey, there's embossing that you can really see clearly. That's actually the glass is molded and has some raised portions of it. Uh, a lot of the fairs will not allow just any jar to be used. Most of the time, there's a criteria that has to be met, and that jar that's on the right is called a queen line style jar, and that is the typical jar that is that meets the requirement for the entry at most of the fairs here. The queen line is nice because while it's wide on one plane, when you turn it sideways, it's very, very narrow. And when it comes to the judging part where we shine a light through the honey, the queen line is best for viewing the honey with the light through it. Whereas I don't have a picture of it here, a mason jar is much, well, it's round all the way around, and so it is thicker. And with the darker honeys, particularly, or even a darker amber, it gets harder, even with the light shining through it, to see if there's anything floating around in that honey that shouldn't be. Then again, with the embossed glass, it definitely uh, detracts from us being able to see if there's anything in the honey. Uh, uh, it also adds, while they can be cute, I guess, when we get to, giving out honey as gifts and stuff, but for judging, they're of no use to a judge having the glass embossed. Same with the sides of mason jars that are embossed and printed, or even have the ounces and the volume printed on it. We don't want that. So here's a couple of keys when bringing your entry of honey to a fair, of what to do to get them there and present them the best way you can and get full points. So keep that jar upright when transporting. Why? Well, because one of the deductions that you can receive is that if the honey is tilted sideways and the honey gets into the lid, or even if the lid isn't screwed on completely, you might end up losing a little bit of your honey. Some fairs require more than one jar as an entry, and each jar of honey has to be identical in the fill height, and so those are just two of the criteria and two of the reasons why to keep it upright. Bring something to clean off the outside of the jar. If your hands get gooey or sticky while you're maneuvering things, you want to be able to clean it. Bring a new lid. A lot of people are like, well, if the honey's going to get up on that lid, how am I going to take care of that? Well, just bring a new lid and it's all handled with. And then when handling the jars to the staff at the fair, hand the jar over with, I wrote white gloves, but you get the idea. We don't want any fingerprints or anything on the outside of the jar. And the staff at the fair that's receiving your entry should also be wearing gloves and only handle it by the lid and the bottom. All righty. Something just doesn't seem right here with my slideshow, but I'll just continue. The refractometer is used to find out the percentage of water that is in the honey. If you remember from your beginning beekeeping class, the most water that a honey can have is 18.5%. So 18.6 and above means that it will ferment. And so anything over 18.5% is, unfortunately, it will not receive a ribbon because it's not going to be good for people to eat. And remember, going back to that safety part, that's one of the things that we're judging. So that's one of the very, very first things that we look at. So we take a little toothpick and we take our refractometer and we place the honey onto the lens of the refractometer, and then we look into it, and this is what we see. Um, the percentage does change based on the temperature, but if we do all the judging at about the same time within the same few hours, we don't see a lot of differential. Notice on the right-hand side, you can't see what that list is all about, but that's the percentage of water. And the dark line, it's slightly hazy, but you might be able to see the very, very darkest part of that line. And that's really accurate of how it looks when I look through a refractometer. It's not a really sharp, clean line. It's a little bit hazy. But notice where that dark line goes just below that 17.0%. So that's that large line that's on the 17.0, and then notice there's a half hash mark, and then there's the 18.0. So between that large 17.0 and that half, which is 17.5, I'm seeing that line just barely past that 17. So I would call that about a 17.1% of water. And I would literally just write that down on that judging scorecard, and that's a pass. Like I said, if it fails, if it's over the 18.5%, which would be that little hash mark past the large 18, we judge no further at that point. We also look at what is inside the honey, and this is where those jars that are nice and clear and have no embossing is really important. We put the jar of honey in front of either a polariscope, which is a box with a light in it, and it focuses the light through the jar. Some fairs even use something as simple as a flashlight. And we look for adulteration or things floating around in the honey, and then we try to decipher what those are. The first thing that is usually really apparent, I'm going to start there on the bottom center, is foam. After the lid is taken off, we look for, sometimes there's just a little bit of foam. Maybe you can notice it around that lip down on the bottom there. You can actually still see the shape of the bubbles there. What happens is when the bubbles in the honey rise up to the surface, they pop and they just create this little foamy surface. If you want to have a really nice, clean entry, go ahead and allow the time for the bubbles to rise. It might take a month even. By putting your jar of honey, say, in a nice warm area, out of direct sunlight, let that honey rise, or let that air bubbles rise in the honey, and then you'll clean those foam off the top. And people use not only like little spoons and stuff, but then, even like little toothpicks to get the very, very perfect top. Notice at the right hand, top right, bubbles. After filtering is down there in the bottom right. It shows you kind of an average. That's a rather large and probably an only first stage filter. You want to use multiple stages of filters that get smaller and smaller so you get all the little bits and pieces out. But what that does as it goes through the filter is it introduces air into the honey, and that's how the honey gets bubbles. And that's what that top right hand picture shows, is bubbles, both large and teeny tiny. It just simply takes time to get rid of those bubbles, like I was talking. Let them go ahead and keep that honey nice and warm and out of direct sunlight, and let those bubbles rise to the surface, pop and become the foam that you see in the middle, and then scrape them off and clean them. If, as judges, we look into a jar of honey that is just like this picture shows, a bunch of bubbles, We're unable to see any other things that might be floating around in there, like I often find and see bee parts, like bee legs and wings, but also we're not able to see things like uh, hair, seen plenty of hair. Or if you use cheesecloth, you'll see some of the strings from the cheesecloth. So that's another pro tip. Don't use cheesecloth, or if you do, use it once and then go ahead and use a micron filter to filter them out. And then finally, on the big picture on the left is crystallization. It very much looks like this is a perfect picture of crystallization. It looks cloudy and it has structure to it that is crystallized or crystals. When I take out my microscope, I can actually see the crystalline nature of it quite often. So there's not a lot you can do about crystallization if it's already happening, other than knowing your honeys and what nectar your honey is coming from. Some nectar, like canola, for instance, is a perfect example. Canola will crystallize almost the second you put it in the jar. So just by knowing what your bees are bringing in and what kind of honey they're making, uh, you'll there are charts and charts online. Believe me, this isn't like secret knowledge. There's lots of information about what nectars crystallize faster and which ones hold on a little bit longer, and don't crystallize as quickly. So, uh, find out what your bees are making to the best of your ability. The other thing we also suggest is if you really want to enter a fair, get honey from your bees early in the year, in the middle of the year, and then maybe as late as 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before the fair, so that you have uh, multiple choices and you can put put forward your best entry. Then the very last criteria, the last one, and this is where it gets a little bit more subjective. But let me talk about the objective part of the aroma and the flavor, which is actually the taste testing of the honey. The objective part of honey is that, first of all, um, it will be in a color range. We already talked about those color ranges, or I showed you a picture of those color ranges. But it needs to look like honey. Even if it's a white honey, it still looks like honey. So there is a color to it, and all the way through the darkest molasses type colored honeys, such as buckwheat, for instance, there is a certain look to honey. There's a certain aroma and fragrance. Now, outside of the particular nectar, the particular flower it came from, which is listed down in that list below, there's an aroma of honey that is the essence of honey, no matter what nectar source it came from. And once you've smelled and tasted, thousands of honeys like I have, um, well, it doesn't take you that many, to be honest. But the more you taste, the more you get used to that essence. Uh, there's also not only the flavor and the sweetness, but the texture and mouthfeel is really important, and it's very indicative of honey. Uh, it is different, and this is where people say, how can you tell the difference between syrup, for instance, like corn syrup, and honey, because they're so similar in molecular makeup? Well, there is. There's very much a texture difference to honey, um, and a mouthfeel, and it's just a matter of trying out several, and you get it. And finally, and this is the one I guess that I understood and figured out the quickest, and that's the aftertaste and the finish. It sounds a lot like I'm talking about wine testing or something, I bet. And it is a lot like that. The aftertaste and the finish of honey is also very indicative of honey and not of, say, something like corn syrup. And that is that lingering flavor and sweetness that only honey has. It's a very, very honey sweetness. And then there is a bit of a bite or a bitterness. Some honeys have a very, very strong bite in the very back of the throat. That's not, it says sour here on this list. I don't think of it as being sour as much as I think of it as a kind of a bite in the back of the throat. And then others, uh, for instance, linden tree honey has more of a texture of butter, and then therefore that bite in the back of the throat doesn't occur, and it's very, very smooth. So as you can see on this list here, for instance, the second one down is clover, which is pretty much a very generic honey here in the United States. Um, you can see across, look at where it says flavor profile there in the center, sweet, mild with hints of grass. Okay, that's not particularly surprising since it's growing right down there in or with grass. Aroma is pleasant and mildly floral. Okay, no big surprise there. Smooth texture is smooth, okay, and creamy. It's funny to think of something that we think of as being so sticky as being creamy, but that is truly the difference between each one of the floral sources of nectar. Uh, if you can imagine some honey on your tongue and allowing it to sort of melt across your tongue. And some honey is going to be viscous and it's going to be more watery, like a viscousness that's very watery. Some is going to be more like jello or jelly going across your mouth. And then just like that clover, some is going to be literally, it's going to feel more like cream or buttery. And that's these are wonderful descriptions. I didn't come up with this chart, so I appreciate whoever did this because it's very, very accurate. The very last one, sourwood, we don't get a lot of sourwood here, but I like how they call that velvety. I've never tried that. I'd really like to try that. My favorite honey here uh, in Washington State is by the tree, the linden tree, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. Not only is the flavor profile very fresh and sweet and clean and a little bit woody, but then, like I said, that texture and that finish on it is super, super smooth, just like butter that's melting on your tongue, but with that wonderful, wonderful honey flavor. So, uh, another pro tip is that if you have strong flavored nectars, floral sources that your bees are making your honey from, over here in Western Washington, we have a huge, huge blackberry flow. Um, and blackberry honey is really strong and very sweet. And it's kind of one of those things, and it's a lot like lavender this way, where some people just love it and some people just hate it. But what I have found is that when beekeepers making their honey, they blend their honey, and using something like either clover or linden, or one of the more neutral flavored honeys, and you blend it with a stronger honey, you will end up with the most fantastic honeys. Absolutely fantastic. So that's just a little bit of a pro tip. If your bees are all into buckwheat, for instance, you might want to tame it. Unless you're selling buckwheat, you can sell buckwheat, but if you want to tame it down and make it more edible for the general public, that's one way to do it. All righty. I think I got back. How'd I do there, Margot?
Sorry, I have to switch back and forth between Facebook and Zoom.
That's
Um, okay, you're doing great.
okay.
Um,
I got back to yeah. I got off of my PowerPoint, I should say.
yeah, you have plenty of time yet.
All righty.
Do you wanna take a few questions here before you uh, keep going?
No, yeah, let's take questions.
Okay, so one is about honey here, and the other, oh, two are about honey, and the other is a more general beekeeping question, which I'm sure you can help with. Um, STS Farms asks, is there a level of micron filter you would recommend for showing?
Oh God. You know what? Data and Man Lake and stuff, they sell those stainless steel progressive, and they're stacks of three different sizes. Uh, I find that those work really well. Um, I also find that ladies' nylons,
Oh,
pro tip, don't use the ones that say suntan or black because the dye will bleed sometimes. So use the what they call nude. Works really, really well.
okay, the other question about honey is I see eucalyptus on the list for having a minty flavor. Are there other plants in Western Washington that would produce a minty flavor?
Well, besides mint and catmint and peppermint and all
Hmm?
that kind of stuff. Um, uh, let's see, minty. You know what? What's it called? Hang on a second. My brain just zapped a little bit. Tansy, tansy stuff. Tansy and I'm drawing a blank as the common name. Uh, they have that kind of a minty flavor also.
Okay.
Somebody
And
help me out. Common name of tansy or whatever it is.
Ellen might know.
Yeah.
Um, the next you have to take off your honey judging cap for a minute, and we'll do the question that's more beekeeping related. Mike Kress says he has a question regarding Formic Pro.
Mm,
He says we have killed a queen using this while temperatures were 78 degrees. We
really?
have a
Oh,
we have a double brood and are considering either one pad or two treatments in a row or two pads. What do you think with regard to using this product? It's 70 degrees roughly for the next week and getting cooler.
yeah, yeah, thankfully, right? Um, I'm sorry to hear that you lost a queen at the right temperature. Although if it's 78 out, it could easily be in the mid 80s on the inside of the hive. Depends on the sun and all that. It's still a bummer. Um, I like the one pad method, especially if there's enough time. The temperatures are staying um, in that range, in that nice range for the Formic Pro. So I like the one pad, and then in 14 days, putting on the second pad. That way you get uh, a full, you get that full 24 days brood, and less apt to kill queens. Although don't, it's getting really late to use Formic Pro, and this is just a cautionary thing is that the brood that you have in the hive right now is your winter babies, your winter brood, um, more than likely. So if the formic will kill open brood, not all of it, but it will kill it. And the warmer it gets, I think we have temperatures here in Western Washington that are over the next week going to be in the mid and upper 70s. So that starts to get a little bit dangerous for the brood with Formic Pro, although Formic Pro is an excellent, excellent product. So, be careful.
And then somebody said tansy ragwort. Does that ring a bell
Ragwort?
for the
I could,
minty?
yeah, yeah.
All right, that's it for the questions for right now.
Too easy. Too easy and never the too many right answers. Um, let me tell you, Dawn Beck, and I don't know if she's been on this programming in the last couple of months, but Dawn Beck and Mount Baker beekeepers have for the last couple of years been using formic starting, I want to say, the beginning of August, weather permitting. Again, you don't want to put it on when it's over the heat, the threshold that Formic Pro especially has. But they've been doing the 2 pads starting around the beginning of August and really knocking the mites down. And they do it that early for the very reason I was just mentioning, which was uh, the August brood will be the nurse bees of the winter babies. And so by really knocking those mites down off of those nurse would be are going to be nurse bees, it makes for much stronger winter bees because they're being fed by such healthy mite-free nurse bees. So smart to use formic, just be really careful because as we get later here in the year, it's now the winter bees and winter brood that are in there, and we don't want to kill those off. It's also, if you're not going to be getting back into your hive uh, once you've used the formic, and you don't know if you have killed the queen or not, and there's always the chance of losing the queen with the formic. So like I said, be careful. Although it's an excellent product for killing mites, it can be a little hard on the bees, quite a bit hard on the bees. Instead of formic, a lot of us over here in the West Sound area are of course using oxalic acid in various forms, um, and testing after we use it. So we're really trying to meet that 2% or less threshold of mites before we winterize them. But that, of course, the nice thing with oxalic acid is that we can continue to treat even after we've winterized them. So it's positive. It's a good thing, but good for you for getting after the mites. Thank you. Um, most of the rest of honey judging, I only brought the slides for the extracted honey, for the liquid honey, but primarily the rest of the judging for honey, like comb honey, for instance, or chunk honey, which is literally pieces of comb, um, bits or bite-sized pieces that's floating in liquid honey in jars. Much of the judging is very much the same. We're still looking for clean jars. We're still looking at being the correct container. We're still looking for no bits and pieces of bees floating around in the honey. Um, when it comes to the actual comb part, whether it's chunk comb or comb honey, which is just the comb itself, we do look for capped comb and a few other details, but most of it's very much the same. Um, I didn't talk a great deal at the very end about the rosettes and special awards. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. And that's really fun, but it also can be a contentious thing. When when the judging panel, if it's just one, if it's just me judging, then I don't have any arguments with anybody else. Otherwise, I'd be a little bit nuts, I guess. But uh, when there's a judging panel, a group of people, uh, and we get down to awarding those special awards like best in class or best in show, and more often than not, what we're doing is we're looking at those people who met the standard, those entries that met the standard and received 100 points or the full points available to them. So we're judging perfect against perfect against perfect in a lot of ways. And that's when all that uh, the subjective nature of judging comes into play, or more of it does. And I think, generally speaking, experience tends to win out there. Um, if I'm, say, the head judge with 14 years of experience, and I have somebody there with only 1 or 2 years of experience, probably my opinion is going to be weighted. Uh, or the judgment is going to be weighted more, in my opinion. So I think that's the way it typically goes in most of the fairs. Uh, the only thing I can say is that differently is that judges also love to see something new or something different. Um, in relationship to, for instance, at the Kitsap Fair this year, we had somebody who did some quilting and made this beautiful quilted pillow, and it was something different, and it was beautifully done. So it had met the standard and the criteria that the fair had for that kind of an entry. But besides meeting all of that standards, it had a uniqueness and it had quality to it that just stood out. And so it received a special award. The other thing I think that is not subjective, but has more to do with experience, the experience of the judge, is knowing how difficult it is to do a particular entry particularly well. And one of those is extracted honey. To do extracted honey extremely well so that you get that 100%, for instance, is not an easy thing. Um, and then if you are receiving 100% on your entry and we're placing you up against somebody else, and let's say a light 100% honey against another 100% honey, light 100%, and we're down to literally looking at details with a sake, one of these things. When I'm looking so close that I'm looking for the teeniest, tiniest um, adulteration of the honey, or the tiniest little bee part against the other one, then that tells you how much work and how perfectly and how much somebody put into their entry. Um, and those kind of entries, not only do they deserve those special awards, but just they deserve the recognition of of the judges of the fair, and saying, "Hey, we know how much work this took. We know how hard this was." Um, then there's a few other entries that I'd like to talk about, and those are just the fun things. And we don't see a lot of these out and about. And it used to be, I know fairs have kind of become, mm, old-fashioned, I guess, in a lot of ways. So we don't see a lot of the entries we used to see, but there's some really fun entries out there, and I'd love to recommend to all of you guys that belong to clubs that maybe you don't do this. The heaviest frame, for instance, is one of those that is just so much fun, and that's so simple. So, the heaviest frame of honey can be just as ugly gets. It just doesn't matter. Now, no cheating and shoving little leaded weights in there or anything, but a lot of fun. And all that is simply the judge, as it were, puts it on a scale, and the heaviest one wins. But super fun. There's a lot of things like that. can still happen. And I think it adds not only a sense of fun, but a sense of it's amazing what we can get out of a apiary, what the bees do for us and what the bees do for themselves that we then take from them. So I just want to mention that. Any other questions out there?
I don't see any, but we'll give people a quick chance. Oh,
Yeah,
yes, here we have another one. Is it standard to use the lid seal liner with queen line jars? We were marked down at one fair for using them despite everyone telling us to make sure they were on, wrinkle free, and clean.
I heard it broke up a little bit, Margot. Queen line jars and lids. What were you talking about, the wax sealer on the inside or what?
They want to know what the if it's standard to use the seal or liner with queen line jars.
Oh,
Did that break up?
yes. I think yes. And you were marked down for that? You know, every fair is different. So got to read the directions. Those are usually in the premium. If it's not stated in the premium, then you should not be marked down for it.
So is there a way to do people generally see all the scoring?
Boy, fair by fair. Um,
Mm.
the most of the fairs that I'm not going to say most of them. Half of the fairs that I've judged at, you do get the score sheet. And I literally have written notes on them, uh, but not all of them. Yeah.
Hmm.
Some of the biggest honey fair, honey judging when it's just honey, uh, they really don't. But I think most of the local county fairs and all that, they do.
So, are there any other questions from the audience? And they don't have to be related to honey. Like I said at the
No?
beginning, Sandy is a master beekeeper. And so she may be able to answer other questions. STS Farms, who's the one that's asking most of the questions about the fair, said that they have had one fair return score sheets and another that did not.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think it's about 50-50 for the ones I've judged in. It's funny. I'll tell you a story about that. Recently, I judged at a fair and um, somebody received back a scorecard that was not for their entry. I don't know how that happened because once I'm done judging and I don't even really do the ribboning, I took my little scorecard. For instance, if this is my jar of honey or the entry, right, I tuck the little scorecard or score sheet underneath it and I place it back on the shelf or the table for wherever I'm judging. And then it's up to the people that are running the particular classes to put the jar and the score sheet and all that over there, and then they put their ribbon on it. I don't do most of that touching. So I get an email, just they're kind of upset. My scorecard is not for the scorecard that was under my honey. It's not for my honey, and I don't know what I did wrong. And uh, I was like, I don't know because first of all, judges never look at the names. So I have no idea what honey yours. And then the other funny thing was it was for wildflower honey. So you know, There must have been 20 entries of wildflower honey. I was like, sorry. Um, Mistakes do happen, but I don't think they happen all that often. And oh well, there you go. The
Yeah.
hazards of
I do have one question. Are all the contests standalone, or are there any where you win at one level and then you go up to the next level, etc.?
Yeah, so the national honey contest, you need to qualify to get there. And then there's qualifying. So the state fair, the Puyallup Fair is a qualifier. I think IEBA, I'm sorry, I think Spokane possibly is a qualifier, uh, but not all fairs are qualifiers. So it's a good question. But typically state fairs are qualifiers. It's kind of like Olympic training and stuff, Olympic stuff.
The Olympic training of honey competitions.
It was very
So,
fun. I had a couple of folks with me judging here in Kitsap this year. Uh, well, I was doing the judging, and they were um, judging along with me just for the experience of it. And because a lot of people say, why would I want to be interested? Why would I want to do that? It's just a beauty contest. And so I think what's interesting about judging is that it's less of a beauty contest than you ever think of it is. Yes, every entry needs to meet these standards and requirements. That a lot of it does have to do with cleanliness, and some of that cleanliness means it's pretty, or that there's not bee parts floating around in there. Sure, that makes it pretty. But the standards really are there because there needs to be a baseline criteria. There needs to be something that we are judging against before the subjective nature of the judging, which again is the flavor and all that um, comes into play. So uh, there's always that factor of safety involved too. Is this really honey? And does it meet the requirements that all honey need to meet? So uh, it, I find it fun, and I really promote it heavy over here with the clubs that I work with and work around, and especially with beginning beekeepers. It's something else for them. Now, we all know it's really hard for first year beekeepers to get honey, but well, depending on where you live in the state, but over here it is. And so it's just one more thing to give a try, and also just to experience another aspect of beekeeping and what the bees make that are just so marvelous.
so for our viewers, do you have any other questions for Sandy?
You're letting me off
Okay.
the hook easy.
I guess here's my last question for you, Sandy. Have you entered honey in a fair to be judged?
I have, but before I judged. Once I became a judge, I was no longer allowed to do that. Um, I did, and then I had one more thing I did, which was my honey was taken to the uh, James Beard cooking. What is that? You foodies out
Is
there,
it a,
help me out.
is it an institute, the James Beard Institute?
Beard is a chef rating and competition. Well, at any rate, my honey was taken by Sante Restaurant, and Sante presented at the James Beard Awards back east. And my honey was used in a glaze over a protein, and it was also used in one of the desserts that was made by their um, patisserie person. And uh, I was absolutely thrilled and delighted to receive a certificate of merit from the James Beard Awards. So
But none of
for
the
the
delicious food.
no, yeah, the chef did really well actually back there, and the dessert maker also did really well. But uh, they had to do all of their cooking and preparation back there. So they took all of it from Spokane. I was still living in Spokane at the time. They took it back there, and then my honey was, of course, in its own separate jar. And so the judging, uh, they wanted to taste the honey separately at one point, and so received a certificate of merit. It was pretty nice. No money,
Well,
just a
that
big
seems
pat.
like oh, they said James Beard is for high level restaurant awarding similar to the Michelin star ratings.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. I used to be able to sell my honey there in Spokane. I had a couple of bakeries and then a couple of restaurants, and Sante at the time was one of them. Um, and that's who went to the James Beard. But I haven't been that lucky. And frankly, over here in Western Washington, I don't make the 55-gallon barrels of honey that I used to over in Spokane. So
wow.
yeah,
Well, that seems like a good place to finish up. Thank you, Sandy, for presenting about hunting judging, and thank everyone. I want to thank everybody who attended. Um, Next month we are going to have Riley Reed from WSU talk about his research into the encroachment of hive beetles into Washington. So that's a pest that we haven't really seen in the past, and
just what we
it's,
need.
yeah, exactly, something else to worry about. So if you have any interest in pests, bee bee pests, please join us next month. I believe it's the around the 18th of October. Same day, the third Thursday of the month, and same time. Thank you all. And our participants said thanks for a great presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.